Good morning, Representative Horsford, and welcome to Miami.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to get to welcome you here and to get into the nerdy weeds about tax and crypto. Now, Representative Horsford, I wanted to get a sense from you as to why you're doing this. Why tax? Why crypto? Why is this your issue? Can you give us some thoughts? Give us some perspectives? What brought you to this intersection today?
Well, first, let me thank Consensus. It's great to be here. And I want to give a shout out to all the stagehands, IATSE, and all the people who make these conferences a success. I'm from Las Vegas, and so I always focus on the people who make these conventions work. But a few months ago, I sat down with a young lady in North Las Vegas in the district that I represent. She didn't have a college degree. She didn't have access to venture capital. She didn't have a network of people in Silicon Valley. But what she did have was an idea. Yep. She had a laptop, and she had access to technology and AI tools. And from that, she built a business. That, to me, is why this moment matters, why we need to merge the intersection between practice and everything that is happening here, which is incredible, with the policymakers, whether it's on Capitol Hill or in state legislatures or in city governments, because we have to be able to do one thing, and that is to close the wealth gap in this country, where the very wealthy continue to do well, while those who have an idea, an opportunity, who want to pursue an opportunity, continue to fall further and further behind. I'm about building economic opportunity, and to me, digital assets, crypto, stablecoin, this is our moment to do that, but we have to get it right. And that's why I'm excited to be here with all of you today.
Well, it's great that you mentioned building, Representative Horsford, and I think that has been the crux of what is going on here. Now, so much of this building is premised on legislation, and I was wondering if you could give us a hot take on where things are with clarity. There's a lot of action in D.C. at the minute. Could we take 2 seconds just to get your breaking news on the Senate and where clarity might be at?
So we passed last year the Genius Act, which I was pleased to vote in favor of in the House. It passed the Senate and was signed into law. The Clarity Act, which is the regulatory framework bill, is still working its way through the Senate. And while I have supported that legislation in the House, it matters how it gets done in the Senate. And because of that, we're waiting, quite frankly, on the legislation. I'm pleased that Senator Tillis and Senator Brooks have tried to reach a negotiation, but it seems like even that negotiation is on hold. And what that means is, despite the progress and the momentum that we have had, this stuff isn't done yet. And that means we all need to stay engaged. We need to stay informed. And you all have voices in this process. So contact your member of Congress, contact your United States Senator, ask where they are, what their position is on these important issues as they affect digital assets, so that we don't lose the momentum that we hope to see right now.
So are you optimistic about passage before the midterms? I think that's the question on everybody's lips here.
Yeah, so to me, it's less about a timeline and more about getting it right. You can rush and pass a bill in Congress that has unintended consequences that you won't be able to fix later. So we know the parameters that we need to work, and that's why I've introduced the only bipartisan bill dealing with taxation of crypto, because we have to get that right as well. Absolutely. It's outdated, and I know we'll get into that in more discussion. But more important than a timeline or a deadline is getting the provisions of law correct, and even if we can't address every provision, to know what is left to be negotiated even after the bills pass.
As a law professor, I could not agree more with that perspective. But I wanted to get into the weeds of what you're doing here, which is really bringing tax into the conversation in such a systematic way. But here's the thing. You mentioned genius, Representative Horsford. You mentioned clarity. What is the position of tax? Everything seems to be moving in its parallel tracks here. Is tax kind of the third wheel? And does crypto have a framework for regulation if tax is not in the picture? So can you talk through how tax fits into this? How do we create convergence? Is convergence even possible?
So I do understand the question from the three-legged stool idea, from genius to clarity to now my bipartisan bill, parity. But I would actually reframe it a bit. I actually think tax is the foundation. Why? Because it's tax policy that will determine, number one, how these digital assets can be used in our finance system. And at a time when our federal tax code is outdated, it does not take into account the modernization of digital assets. That is why we need to pass a bill like parity. Think about where we are right now. As I mentioned in your question, we've made meaningful progress on the regulatory side, but there are questions left unanswered. For example, none of the current regulatory policy framework tells a consumer, an institution, or a builder what happens to their taxes when they sell a digital asset, an earned staking reward, lend crypto on the US platform, or make a charitable contribution in Bitcoin. Those are tax questions, and they remain entirely unresolved. And that is why we need to pass my bill, the Parity Act, which is a bipartisan bill that I've been working on with my Republican colleague, Max Miller. And to be clear, there are some really tough negotiations within this bill that we've worked on over 9 months. And while we haven't been able to reach agreement on everything, we have identified areas of consensus and areas where there's still more work to be done. So to me, what we can't do is allow what happened back in 1986 when Congress left the tax treatment of derivatives unresolved, right? Look back on history, and as you know, as a tax law professor, there are certain things that you want settled. You want that clarity. You want that predictability. You want that certainty in the law in order for everyone to know the rules of the road. And that's what I'm working to advance, and that's why this legislation is so important.
So you mentioned the bipartisan efforts that you're making here, Representative, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about what's happening on the Republican side. Senator Lummis, for example, has her proposal that she's brought forward here. Are there areas of significant disagreement in that context? And what does a bipartisan path through the Senate with your bill look like here in that context? How does one get the votes? And if somebody's out here in the audience and trying to build and do what you're encouraging them to do, how should they plan that building based on Senator Lummis's proposal, yours? How does that work for those who are not in DC?
Yeah. Well, let me first start by saying this shouldn't be about partisanship or politics. It should be about our pocketbooks. Go back to the beginning of where I started. My North Star is advancing policy that creates economic opportunity and closes the wealth gap. Not policies that cause economic uncertainty. So I don't care about partisanship when it comes to advancing economic opportunity. And let me be even more clear. Digital assets, crypto, Bitcoin, has an opportunity to so transform our economic future, that this is literally the level playing field that we've been asking for, that communities like the ones I represent in Nevada have been asking for, to be able to decentralize access to these financial instruments, to empower people with the ownership themselves, to not have to go through institutions to get access to capital, to have the creativity to deploy new innovations in Bitcoin in ways that I haven't even fully come to realize. And so I again, don't want legislation that is so rigid, that's so partisan, that it can't sustain what party is in the majority at any one given time, or that doesn't really advance economic opportunity in the way that all of you envision it, the way that my constituents, the way that that young woman who has an idea that's just looking to grow her business is looking to do that.
I mean, I think people forget how much crypto has impacted disadvantaged and disenfranchised communities. When you look at crypto ownership, ownership in black and brown communities, LGBTQ plus communities, has been super high relative to other populations. So it's something that gets forgotten in the dialogue. So, you know, I fully appreciate and respect what you're trying to say here, Representative Horsford, but some of this depends on having institutional structures in place for your legislation and bipartisan efforts to actually be possible. And you've mentioned yourself that the IRS right now is not ready to be able to take on some of those duties for dealing with reporting of crypto transactions. You've ordered a study here to be able to pursue some of those policies, but it's not ready here. And we're ordering studies. How long do people have to wait for that institutional structure to be in place for folks that are needing crypto but don't have financial slack to then have to keep waiting to get that clarity on how they should organize their lives? So can you speak to the timeline here, the institutional setup here, and how that relates to your work?
So how many of you believe that the IRS is well positioned now to manage what is coming and what is here already in the digital asset space? None of us. And that's the reality. It is not. But by not passing the Parity Act and giving the roadmap for the rules of engagement, it actually cements even less clarity. So meanwhile, right now, this tax season, there are tens of thousands of forms that are being sent out to users of digital assets that the IRS honestly can't even manage. There's not adequate staff. They're not the experts within the Internal Revenue Service with the expertise or the knowledge to know how to define these assets or to treat them as a capital gain or as income. That is a very basic thing in tax law. You're either income or you are a capital gain as a wealth. And that is one of the questions that we're looking to get answered in the Parity Act. By providing that clarity, it gives more direction, first and foremost, to the users of the digital assets, to small businesses that may be now taking them as payment, and also to our regulators who do need direction. But they can't initiate that direction without legislative intent. And that is where the Parity Act is so important and why I'm working with Max Miller to try to get this right. The sense of Congress, the language in this legislation signals a clear policy mandate, meaningful consumer relief that's administered within a system that has integrity. We're asking Treasury to tell us what is achievable and when they can do it, because the reality is there does need to be more of an infrastructure built in order to provide the proper oversight, to provide the technical assistance. And those are questions that we do not have answers today, but that doesn't mean that we still can't act to provide the congressional intent that's needed, and that is what we will get by passing the Parity Act.
So just to follow up on that, I think that's incredibly helpful and a thoughtful way to at least frame the issue realistically and practically. So does this mean that in this legislation and the proposals that you're making, that there's a commitment to institutional reform as well of IRS with respect to crypto? Like, is that being planned? Are you sort of mapping that out right now so that we don't have to wait and have a lack of certainty about what's coming next from the institutional side?
Absolutely. The short answer from a member of Congress, the answer is yes. We need to be committed in the long term to continue to make the enhancements and to the improvements. For what? For more fair and just tax policy. That should be the case for digital assets, as it should be for our entire federal tax code. There is fragmentation that, unless we get this right, will continue to persist. If a set threshold without solving non-custodial reporting, for example, you create an incentive to break transactions across wallets and accounts to stay under the limit. That's a real risk, and the IRS does not have the tools to detect the issue at scale. Those are the types of problems that will have to be addressed in the long term, but it's why we need the community to stay engaged, to tell us what's happening in real time so that we can continue to make those improvements over time.
Wonderful. And I imagine that the industry has to be a key part of this conversation, for example, to assist with reporting and other aspects of this as well.
Yes, and hearing from my constituents on this is why I've leaned into crypto to begin with.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know much about crypto, digital assets, Bitcoin. It was my constituents showing up at town halls asking me what my position was, what I was going to do to help lead the discussion on these issues that, quite frankly, challenged me and my staff to be abreast about this emerging sector. Not just emerging, it's here right now. And know our federal government, our federal agencies are not going to be able to keep up in every regard because it's moving faster than the agencies can. But that doesn't mean we don't need clarity. It doesn't mean we don't need stability and certainty, because this is where wealth is being generated. This is where ownership is being derived, and that means we need to get it right, and we need to make sure the rules of the game are clear. One, so that we protect the assets, and two, that we make sure that people know that this is something worth investing in the long term.
So it's incredible the work that you're doing here, Representative Horsford, to bring tax so deeply into the conversation. I think that in itself is just a huge contribution here. There's a couple of aspects of this, which is you're doing a lot and bringing a lot into parity. There's also a lot that's left out. Just thinking about even retirement accounts as being a key aspect of wealth building, wealth creation, and where this asset class might go over the next 20 years or so for millennials and others who might be looking for certainty in that context. So what about those areas right now that parity is not addressing, that are not included in the bill? How do you propose to address those issues, and do you have a formulation for thinking about a future reform agenda that might include potentially retirement accounts or other innovations as they come in? So just your thoughts on what's not here at present.
Yeah, so let me take each of these individually, because you know a lot about the bill, more so than others who may be watching. And I think that it's important because it's one of the core critiques of the Loomis bill that it attempts to resolve every outstanding crypto tax question simultaneously. And in doing so, quite frankly, it pairs genuinely helpful provisions with definitional language that is so broad that it creates other problems. So there are unintended consequences when you do that. So our approach with our bipartisan bill, the Parity Act, is different because we don't want to prevent the progress we can make and then have these unintended consequences. So, for example, on the non-custodial broker question, this sits at the intersection of tax law and market structure. And I would argue it gets a cleaner resolution once clarity settles the underlying definitional framework, which we hope it will. But that doesn't mean that we still can't work towards that legislation. The broker reported rules that came out of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act generated enormous controversy precisely because the definitional questions about who is and who is not a broker in a decentralized environment was not resolved. That is something that we have to work on. On protocol migrations and wallet-to-wallet transfers, as I said, there are genuinely dependent on how the underlying assets are classified. And SEC and the CFTC both provided guidance for this in March. So that's an issue that we are working through. On retirement account access, as you asked, I want to be direct. This is something that I personally want to see because in order to close that wealth gap, we have to be able to help people plan for their retirement. And digital assets, crypto, are a way to do that. I know that there is genuine bipartisan appetite for us to work on this, but rushing it and just putting language in a bill without getting it right creates these unintended consequences. So the question of whether it belongs in this bill or in a subsequent vehicle is one that we're still working through.
Yep.
It doesn't mean it won't happen now,
Yep.
but it doesn't mean that it can't happen in the future. But the broader point is that I really want to make to this audience is that parity is designed to set a durable floor, not to be the last word. We solved the problems that are clearly defined already, and unless we solve those problems, they'll continue to persist. Those problems are urgent and they need to be resolved now, and clearly within the tax code's jurisdiction in order to have the protection for the consumer, small businesses, and those who are owners of these assets to define whether it gets treated as income or capital gains, and that is something that we actually do achieve in the Parity Act and why we need to move this legislation forward.
It's very hopeful to hear that. Representative Horsford, we have like a minute left. In that time, can you just give us your hot take on the post-midterm landscape? So much of this, as you note, is getting it right. It may take some time. What are your thoughts on bipartisanship after the midterms if the estimates are right, the Democrats win and potentially win quite resoundingly and take the House? What do you feel about the future of crypto regulation in that context?
Well, thank you. Again, it's been great to be here with all of you. This is why no one party should own crypto or digital assets. This is why, as a Democrat who is a leading architect in designing the tax provisions for crypto, I've been leaning into this, not leaning away from it. I don't want this to be defined in a partisan way so that when parties shift power in Washington, that it affects all of you, the people, the users. You are the builders of digital assets. You are the people that we should be working to protect. And that is why we need policy that is bipartisan, that endures across whichever party is in power. That's why we need to set clear jurisdictional lines between the SEC and the CFTC. It's why protecting self-custody and the right to hold your own keys matters. It's why I've supported broader market structure efforts like FIT21. We need clear definitions that don't hold innovation back. And I'll be frank, there are colleagues on my side of the aisle who need to get up to speed, who have to be educated, who you all can help convince to get on the right side, to work with us, to create what? Opportunity and economic security, where we are the owners and the builders and not just the consumers. That is the shift that digital assets is offering. We cannot allow this to pass marginalized communities behind, nor can we only allow this to be held in the hands of the few. This is an opportunity for us to decentralize it in such a way that we create economic opportunity that's inclusive for everybody. That's worth fighting for, and that's something that we can do together.
Incredibly well said, and such a positive note to end this conversation on. Thank you so much, Representative Horsford. Thank you to the organizers, and thank you to you guys in the room for such a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.